Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Classic Comics. In the coming year, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the comic industry. There have been voices warning about a coming collapse in sales for several years now, and voices within the industry, including comic creators, comic journalists, and comic shop owners, have dismissed these concerns, assuring us that the industry is fine, better than ever, in fact. But over the last year, we've seen more and more voices, mostly comic shop owners, admitting that there is a problem, and more comic pros complaining as well about having difficulty getting work and not getting paid. And in the last couple of months, we've finally seen some comic shop owners warning that the industry is in deep trouble. I did a video on Phil Boyle of Comics Coliseum down in Florida. I'll leave a link to that video up in the corner, who warned that unless the big two publishers make drastic changes, the direct market may be finished within 2 years. And now we have Brian Hibbs, one of the most visible and vocal comic shop owners in the business, who runs several comic shops out in California, particularly around San Francisco. Now he is sounding the alarm. So let's just see what Brian has to say here. And this is at Comics Beat. Maybe you've seen the Dr. Manhattan meme floating around recently. John is on Mars contemplating that it's the mid 50s and comics are dying. It's the mid 70s and comics are dying. It's the mid 90s and comics are dying. It's the early 2020s and comics are dying. Haha, everyone laugh. Roll credits. But like all good jokes, there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere. In the 50s, the creative output of comics was largely infantilized by the creation of the Comics Code in the wake of the Senate hearings. In the 1970s, the renaissance of the underground comics movement was largely swept away by the unreliability of the head shop market, while the newsstand began a free fall for mainstream comics due to the erasure of mom and pop pharmacies. In the 1990s, greed was good until it wasn't, and thousands of accounts stopped buying comics and distribution narrowed down to a single distributor in the wake of Marvel's bankruptcy. And here in the 2020s, well, I don't know hardly a single small business that is actually thriving, while entertainment businesses of all sorts on all ends of the spectrum struggle. You should probably go and read Heidi's latest overview on things. A lot of things I was planning on linking to are already laid out there, and I've already covered this article, so I'm not going to go check that out. Before we go much deeper, let's get the culture war stuff out of the way. Anyone, anywhere who wants to suggest the market's problems have to do with comics being too woke is a total screwball. Full stop. The market always determines what it wants, and things that are not engaging to the audience will always go away in favor of things that do engage. Comics will never be exactly what you remember from your childhood, nor should they be, because both you and they change or die. Absolutely anyone trying to push that Comicsgate agenda is a bad actor who simply doesn't understand either the markets or the creative process, and such people should be shunned and ignored. Hmm. Okay, well, this is the thing. He says the market always determines what it wants, and things that are not engaging to the audience always go away in favor of things that do engage. Okay, well, if it's not the woke elements in the comics, then what is it? I mean, if it's not taking characters like, Robin or Superboy or Iceman, just name a character and making them gay, then what is it? Because he says, well, if the market doesn't want it, it'll just go away. Well, how many series has Captain Marvel had in just the last decade, in the last 12 years? How many times has her series been canceled and rebooted and started again? And, because if people want the book, if people want that book, if the market wants it, then it wouldn't be getting canceled. If what he's saying is true, that if the market doesn't want it, it'll go away, then why does it keep getting rebooted? Because her series can never sustain itself. Same thing with Ms. Marvel. And same thing with any number of other female characters, honestly, that Marvel has tried to turn into a big deal. No, I believe that most of our current problems come down to the loss of institutional knowledge and short term thinking on the publishing end. not what color or gender or sexuality a fictional character might be. Just a person whose ability to literally feed and house his family is solely dependent upon being able to sell comics. Culture war issues aren't even a top 20 problem for the comics industry. Well, I mean, he's not wrong here. As he says, the loss of institutional knowledge. Yeah, I do believe that there's been a big loss in the industry in terms of longtime comic pros who have basically been driven out. These were people who knew how to sell comics, knew how to make them, and I do think a lot of them have been driven out by the honestly, by the political climate to a large extent. And yes, there are short-term publishing fixes that are also contributing to the problem. And he'll talk a little more about that here in a minute. One other upfront note here. Most of this column, and indeed much of the issues with the direct market, are discussing issues with serialized comics. Graphic novels have their own set of issues, but most of those are very different from the current challenges to periodicals. When I say comics, I mean periodicals in the context of this conversation. In other words, your standard floppy comics that come out every month. Now, there are absolutely problems that relate to the content, but they're emphatically not the culture war charges. And there are acute problems with the value proposition of comics as well. And with value proposition, I assume he's talking about the price. The content problems, I think, started brewing when deconstructed storytelling became the rule over making sure that each individual comic was, as Heidi's want to say, a satisfying chunk. I want to be very clear here. Almost every single person working at a comics publisher is someone who loves the medium very much, and in no way do I believe that anyone is deliberately setting out to make mediocre comics. I think rather that the incentives and corporate expectations of the two largest corporations, Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery, are very much misaligned with what the audience actually wants. Periodical comics are very distinct from other kinds of consumer products in that buying into the Marvel or DC universes are a fundamental intrinsic part of the comic's appeal. Or to put it another way, if there are 20 different Batman t-shirts, the fact that you only like or can afford only 4 of them is an entirely different proposition than that same level of desire interest in 4 of 20 entries in the ongoing and seemingly in continuity adventures of your favorite fictional character. The voracious corporate need is to make more profit this quarter than they did last quarter, but this invariably seems to lead to overexpansion of content. Last week's shipment had 6 different comics where Batman was the named lead character. This week's has 5 different Spider-Man comics. It also leads to overexpansion of SKUs in terms for variant covers, etc., or stunt publishing like starting a new first issue, or all of these other things that ultimately lead to the market depending upon selling more and more product to fewer and fewer customers, rather than expanding the reading audience for periodical comics. Okay, now I think he does have a point here. I do think that as they say here, the deconstructed storytelling, I do think that is a factor because it used to be, there was this sort of view that every comic is someone's first comic. And so that's why they tended to go with self-contained stories. You didn't see a lot of stories that were more than maybe 2 issues at the most. But after Watchmen came out, particularly in Dark Knight Returns, and as the direct market began to flourish, there were more and more sort of prestige sort of books that had limited storylines. And even in the main monthly books, you started having more and more multi-issue storylines that would carry from month to month to month. And I do think that that did create a barrier to entry because it makes it more difficult for a reader to go, well, where do I jump on? And where do I start reading? Because every month you're in the middle of some multi-issue story. But that's going to be a barrier to entry for new readers. That's not going to be something that drives away existing readers. Existing readers are used to that, and a lot of them like it that way. But the multi-issue story arcs and the deconstructed storytelling is not what's going to drive away existing readers. What's going to drive them away? Well, making fundamental changes to characters that they really like taking a character they've read for years and making him gay, for example. taking a character they've read for years and making them trans or whatever. This is the paradigm we have to reverse. We have to sell fewer, better comics to more people if we want to change the market trajectory. Because, albeit anecdotal, I am hearing more and more and more retailers saying our current trajectory of sales has me thinking that quarter one is going to be truly brutal, and I might have to close or downsize or move to still have a store by the summer. Two of the 9 current comic book stores in San Francisco have already made very public pleas. And I think the rest of us here are wondering if we need to do the same. And he's talking about this story here. San Francisco's oldest toy store may close up shop for good. And then Mission Comics and Art asks community for solutions to stay open. So these are two venues that sell comics in San Francisco where they're basically saying,
we need your help!
Stores that I know are well run and run by people who are genuinely passionate about the thing they sell and who stock a wide variety of stock. Okay, well, that's kind of weirdly written. And all over the country are talking about how brutal the last 2 months have been. And this is right when our holiday sales should be clicking into overdrive. I run a diversely stocked store that is untethered from corporate IP as I could humanly steer it for decades, that has a very strong method of cultivating new civilian readers, and especially kid readers, in a long term subscription model. And I'm telling you, sales are way off what they were in pre pandemic 2019, and that I'm not really positive that I see how I am going to make it to summer without I'm seeing being released. And the audience's reaction to this work. Well, why are they reacting that way? I mean, he basically says, okay, I'll keep going. I'll go so far to say that the last order I submitted, November codes for mostly January 24, was the lowest order we've submitted since the pandemic closed us down. And the first draft of the December for February 24 that my manager has started was even lower than that. This makes me wonder, in the post COVID absence of public sales charts, how are comics selling now? Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it?
I don't know. It's a mystery.
If you look at non-stunt comics on issue number 2 or after, and if you take variant covers out of the factor, are any comics selling over 100,000 any longer? I have my doubts. And when I asked a large number of publishers about current circulations, I received a whole lot of radio silence. And publishers are usually the first ones to trumpet their successes. And so I wonder, how low is it really? Below 75K, below 60K, 50K? And let's face it, even 100K isn't that great of a number with around 2,500 comic stores. That comes out to only 40 copies per venue on average, which is fine when you have over a half dozen or more titles selling that well. But that absolutely doesn't seem to be the situation today. Well, yeah, I mean, people have been talking about this for a few years now. During the pandemic, companies started moving away from Diamond, and Diamond themselves have basically changed the way they do business so that now comic sales are no longer really publicly accessible. So we can only guess how things are selling, but they've done that deliberately in order to hide the bleeding, in order to hide how bad the sales are. I mean, what else is the answer? In one of the private retailer message boards I'm on, someone asked, well, how do we change this narrative of doom? And my one word answer was success, which is me being less flip than you might think. Periodical comics always rise and fall on books that have a creative buzz and the market's ability to trailblaze those titles. This was true 35 years ago when I got into the game, and Sandman led to hundreds of brand new customers rushing in, lifting all of the boats around it. This was true a decade back when Saga did the same. This was true with New 52 and House of X and Walking Dead and so many other series through the decades that brought so many excited new faces clamoring to be right at the door when each Wednesday rolled around. So I think we're just one success away from a change in narrative, a change in fortune. But I think my gravest fear is that even if this success does get discovered, because buzz books can almost never be manufactured but must be creatively driven, they'll end up getting stifled by the corporate directives from above them. Disney and Discovery are both deeply in debt right now, so it's hard to see them avoiding what worked before in SKU count and rapid title expansion in the need to maximize short term cash flow in order to encourage and build that rising tide. Okay, now through this section, he mostly talks about how difficult it's become to order comics now and what an ordeal it is because you've got all these multiple distributors instead of one single distributor the way it used to be. I'm not going to go on about that a whole lot, uh, but I'm going to go ahead and skip down to here. This is why you hear so many voices today asking out loud about the health of the market. We are suffering a creative problem right now where audiences aren't responding to much of what's being published. Okay, well, right there. Audiences aren't responding to much of what's being published. Okay. So if it's, he says audiences. So that would seem to mean the comic book audience. That means existing customers, does it not? Again, the whole thing of the serialized storytelling and the long plot lines and all that, yes, that is a barrier to entry, I think, for new readers. But new readers, or expectant readers, that's not really the audience yet. The audience is the pre-existing customers, and they're not responding to much of what is being published. Now, I don't believe it's the deconstructed storylines and the extended plots and all that. I mean, the pre-existing audience is accustomed to that. They've had that for years. So, what is it then? And again, I mean, we know what it is, but it's, even now, guys like Brian, they won't admit it. They won't admit what's going on. While at the same time, retailers are finding their workload and effort and costs going up while sales are declining. This is a bad potential recipe, and when you hear that stores are closing or in danger of closing, you should take this news seriously right now. Oh, really? Because, again, people have been sounding the alarm for a few years, but every time another comic shop closes, it's been dismissed as just, some other factor. That's not the problem. Comics are fine, whatever. If, God forbid, the two stores in San Francisco talking publicly about their struggling business fail in the new year, I have 35 years of history that shows me when a store closes, most of the customer base just vanishes rather than spreading around. And at some point, and it's a point that might not be very far, losing a certain critical mass of stores will cause the entire direct market side of things to fold like a house of cards. Again, this is something that certain people have been warning about for years, that this could happen, because again, when a store would close, well, so what? It's not a big deal. There's thousands of stores, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you lose a certain number of stores, you're not going to have enough venues left to sell and move enough issues to make a profit. And the whole thing is going to collapse. And that's exactly what Brian is saying here. But again, some people were saying this years ago, 5, 6 years ago. But again, even Brian still won't really acknowledge what's going on. And as he said, he tried to talk to DC and Marvel to say, what are the sales anyway? How are the sales? And they're not talking. Radio silence, right? I don't know. Anyway, what do you think? Do you think what Brian is saying here is correct? Do you think he's off? Do you think he's leaving any important information out? Let me know in the comments. And please do like this video and sub to the channel and check out some of my other videos while you're here. And I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.